The thick scent of bleach burned my nostrils as I scrubbed the toilet bowl, my knees aching against the cold tile floor. Laughter echoed from the doorway where Vince leaned casually against the frame, arms crossed over his expensive tailored shirt, watching me with undisguised satisfaction. "Make sure you get under the rim, Madeline. That's where all the nasty stuff hides." His voice carried that particular tone he reserved for moments like this, honey-coated venom. Behind him stood at least 15 of my colleagues, some averting their eyes in embarrassment, others watching with morbid fascination. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody objected. The silence in that executive bathroom was broken only by the harsh sound of bristles against porcelain and the occasional quiet chuckle from Vince. "Maybe this will teach you respect?" he sneered, handing me a mop for the floors. 15 years in chemical engineering, and you still haven't learned when to keep your concerns to yourself. I said nothing, focusing on the task, ignoring the burn of humiliation that crawled up my neck. My laboratory coat had been replaced with yellow rubber gloves that reached my elbows. My data reports exchanged for cleaning supplies. "The division review is tomorrow," Vince continued, addressing the onlookers as much as me. "And we're going to present our findings without Madeline's catastrophizing. The XL5 compound is stable. End of discussion." The crowd shuffled nervously. They knew what I knew, that the compound wasn't stable beyond 30 days, that it would break down once it reached the warehouses, that it could harm people. But they also knew what had happened to the last person who had crossed Vince too many times. "Just following orders," I murmured, loud enough for only Vince to hear as I moved to the sink. His eyes narrowed. "What was that?" I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Nothing important, just like my test results, apparently. The vein in his temple throbbed visibly. "This is why you're scrubbing toilets instead of—" The bathroom door swung open, cutting him off mid-sentence. Leonard Graves, CEO, stood in the doorway, tall, imposing, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. The crowd parted instantly. "What's happening here?" Leonard asked, his gaze moving from the crowd to Vince, then landing on me, still kneeling, gloved hands dripping with cleaning solution. Vince recovered quickly, his expression morphing into practiced concern. "Just demonstrating proper workplace hierarchy," he answered with artificial sweetness, gesturing at me. "Madeline has been causing problems with the XL5 project, spreading unnecessary panic about stability issues that don't exist." Leonard's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked at me. "Is that right?" Something inside me, something that had been crumbling under months of systematic undermining, suddenly hardened. I rose to my feet, peeled off one glove, and extended my hand to the CEO. "Madeline Reeves, sir, Senior Chemical Analyst." I held his gaze steadily. "I've discovered that the XL5 industrial solvent becomes unstable after 30 days at standard warehouse temperatures, exactly when it would reach customer facilities. The compound breaks down, creating pressure that can rupture containers when they're opened." The bathroom fell deadly silent. "The production run is scheduled for tomorrow," I continued, "and I've been arguing that we need to adjust the formula before proceeding. I have 3 viable alternatives that would prevent this degradation without delaying production." Vince's face contorted with fury. "She's exaggerating for attention." "I can prove it with a simple acceleration test," I interrupted. "We can simulate 30 days of degradation in 2 hours by elevating the temperature." Leonard studied my face carefully. Everyone except Madeline and Vince, out. Now. The crowd scattered instantly. Several practically sprinted away. I'll never forget what happened next. Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this story so far. If you want to hear how this unfolds, and believe me, you haven't seen anything yet, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and I promise the rest of this story contains twists you won't see coming. Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with someone like Vince in your workplace. Now, let's get back to that executive bathroom where everything was about to change. My name is Madeline Reeves. For 15 years, I dedicated myself to chemical engineering, specifically, developing industrial compounds that were both effective and safe. I'd risen through the ranks on merit, becoming the most senior analyst at one of the country's largest chemical manufacturers. My innovations had saved the company millions and prevented countless workplace accidents. Then Vince Harlow arrived. He'd been brought in as division director 2 years ago, an outsider with an MBA and connections to board members but limited technical knowledge. From day one, he made it clear that he viewed the research team as obstacles rather than assets. We were speed bumps on his highway to the executive suite. "We need to move faster," became his mantra. "The competition isn't waiting for perfect. They're shipping now." Initially, I tried to work within his new system. I streamlined my testing protocols, found efficiencies in the research pipeline. But then came the XL5 project, a new industrial solvent meant to replace our aging flagship product. The pressure to launch was immense, with major contracts hanging in the balance. 6 weeks before launch, my team noticed something concerning. At standard temperature, the compound began breaking down after approximately 30 days. The degradation created pressure inside sealed containers, pressure that could cause rupturing when opened. "We need to adjust the stabilizing agent," I explained during a production meeting, spreading out the test results for everyone to see. "The current mix becomes reactive over time." Vince had laughed dismissively, always looking for problems where none exist. He patted my shoulder condescendingly. 15 years in this industry and still so nervous about every little thing. "This isn't nervousness," I'd insisted. "This is physics and chemistry. Look at the data." His expression had darkened then. "You're just trying to sabotage the launch timeline because you weren't chosen to lead the project." That accusation had stunned me into momentary silence, long enough for him to move on to the next agenda item, as though the matter was settled. The following weeks became a quiet war. Each time I brought evidence, Vince found ways to discount it. He began excluding me from crucial meetings. He assigned me to unrelated tasks when key decisions were being made. When I circumvented him by bringing my concerns to his superior, Vince claimed I was creating unnecessary alarm to undermine his leadership. And somehow, people believed him. The director above Vince saw only a difficult female employee challenging a promising young executive. The narrative became not about chemical stability, but about my supposed jealousy and resistance to change. The bathroom cleaning incident was simply the culmination, a public humiliation designed to break me completely before the final production approval. Now, standing in that executive bathroom with Leonard Graves, I realized this moment would determine not just the fate of the XL5 project, but my entire career. "Let's move this to the lab," Leonard said after Vince and I had each presented our sides. "I want to see this accelerated testing for myself." In the laboratory, with Leonard watching intently, I set up 2 identical containers of XL5, one with the current formula, one with my modified version. I placed them in climate-controlled chambers set to simulate 30 days of aging. "This will take approximately 2 hours, I explained. "The temperature increase accelerates the chemical breakdown process proportionally." "Convenient," Vince muttered. 2 hours where you can feed him your biased perspective." Leonard silenced him with a look. "While we wait, I'd like to review the complete test data. I provided everything: raw numbers, analysis, projections of failure rates, and potential consequences." Vince grew increasingly agitated as Leonard asked pointed technical questions that revealed his own considerable scientific knowledge, something Vince had clearly underestimated. "Why wasn't this escalated to me sooner?" Leonard finally asked. "I tried," I said quietly. "My reports were filtered." Vince's face flushed. "That's an outrageous." The timer interrupted his protest. We turned to the test chambers. The difference was undeniable. The original formula sample had visibly discolored, and the container showed signs of distortion from internal pressure. My alternative remained clear and stable. Leonard stared at the evidence for a long moment. "Stop production," he said finally. "Implement Madeline's formula immediately." "But the delay will cost," Vince began. "Less than the lawsuits and recall would," Leonard cut him off. "And far less than the human cost if this product injured workers." He turned to me. "Madeline, I'd like you to personally oversee the reformulation." "Vince, my office in 1 hour." As Leonard left, Vince's expression morphed from shock to calculated calm. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You've embarrassed me in front of the CEO. There are consequences for that kind of disloyalty." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. Vince still controlled my performance evaluations, my project assignments, my daily work life. And now he had reason to destroy me. What I didn't know then was that the real battle was just beginning. Vince had underestimated me once by thinking I would quietly accept the bathroom humiliation. His second mistake would be assuming that I hadn't prepared for war. By the time I left the lab that evening, 3 things had happened. The XL5 production had been delayed. Vince had emerged from Leonard's office with a brittle smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I had received an unexpected email requesting my presence at the executive offices first thing tomorrow morning. The question hanging over me as I drove home wasn't whether I'd done the right thing. I knew I had. The question was whether doing the right thing would cost me everything I'd worked for. Sleep evaded me that night. I paced my apartment, replaying every interaction with Vince over the past months, cataloging every slight, every manipulation. The bathroom incident kept flashing through my mind, the faces of my colleagues watching, saying nothing. By morning, exhaustion had hardened into something else entirely. I dressed with particular care, a charcoal suit I reserved for important presentations, subtle makeup that emphasized my eyes, professional, competent, unbroken. The executive floor was unnervingly quiet when I stepped off the elevator at 7:30 a.m. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating artwork I'd never had reason to notice before. A receptionist I didn't recognize guided me to a conference room where Leonard Graves waited alone. "Madeline," he said, rising from his seat, "thank you for coming early. No sign of Vince, no human resources representative, just the CEO and me. Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I've spent most of the night reviewing the XL5 project documentation." My throat tightened. Despite the evidence, despite Leonard's apparent support yesterday, this could still go badly. Executives protected executives. That was the natural order. "What I found," Leonard continued, "was disturbing. Not just the technical issues, but the pattern of your concerns being systematically dismissed. Can you tell me when this started?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected to defend myself, not to be asked for my perspective. "About 4 months ago," I said carefully, "when the first stability tests showed anomalies. Initially, I thought Vince simply didn't understand the technical implications, so I prepared more detailed reports. But it became clear that he understood but chose to ignore them." Leonard finished. I nodded. "What was most concerning," Leonard said, sliding a folder toward me, "was finding these. Inside were copies of my original safety reports, the ones I'd submitted to Vince, with certain sections crossed out, numbers altered, conclusions rewritten. My documentation had been edited before being passed up the chain. I didn't authorize these changes," I said, anger rising as I flipped through the pages. "I know." Leonard's expression was grim. "Falsifying safety data is grounds for immediate termination. Had the product been released with these issues, people could have been injured. The company could have faced serious liability." The door opened and a woman entered. Elise from legal, someone I'd interacted with only peripherally over the years. "Sorry I'm late," she said, taking a seat. "Traffic was brutal." Leonard nodded. "I was just explaining to Madeline what we discovered regarding the XL5 documentation." Elise's expression turned serious. "The altered reports alone would justify termination, but there's more." She looked at me directly. "Were you aware of other incidents involving similar treatment of staff who raised concerns?" I hesitated. There had been rumors. Raj from testing, who suddenly transferred to another division. Tanya, who had quit without notice after a project disagreement. "I've heard things," I said carefully. "Nothing I could prove." "Well, after yesterday's incident in the executive bathroom, which apparently had quite an audience, several employees have come forward with similar stories," Elise said. "Not just technical disputes, but a pattern of public humiliation as a management tactic." My mind reeled. Others were speaking up. "Vince has been suspended pending a full investigation," Leonard said. "In the meantime, I need someone to take over the division who understands both the technical challenges and the team dynamics. Someone who puts safety first." The implication hung in the air for several heartbeats before I realized what he was suggesting. "Me? You want me to run the division?" "Temporarily, at minimum," Leonard confirmed. "The XL5 reformulation needs to happen immediately. The team trusts you. And frankly, after watching you stand your ground yesterday despite extraordinary pressure, I'm convinced you have the necessary leadership qualities." It was vindication, beyond anything I could have imagined yesterday while kneeling on that bathroom floor. Yet, something didn't sit right. This resolution felt too neat, too swift. "What about Vince's allies in upper management?" I asked. "The people who enabled this culture? They won't simply accept my authority." Leonard and Elise exchanged glances. "You're right to be concerned," Leonard acknowledged. "Which brings us to the second purpose of this meeting. We need to discuss strategy. For the next hour, we mapped out a plan, not just for the XL5 project, but for addressing the deeper issues that had allowed someone like Vince to thrive. By the time we finished, I understood that my promotion wasn't simply about technical expertise. It was about changing a system. When I walked onto the production floor later that morning, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Word had spread about Vince's suspension. Speculation ran rampant. People watched me with new eyes as I called everyone together. As some of you know, the XL5 formula requires modification before production. I began, keeping my voice level. I've been asked to lead the division while Director Harlow is on administrative leave. Our priority is implementing the stabilized formula and proceeding with production as quickly as safety allows. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I noticed several people who had watched my humiliation yesterday now couldn't meet my eyes. I need the core research team in the main lab in 15 minutes. Everyone else, please continue your regular duties. My door is open if you have concerns or information you believe I should know. As people dispersed, Mason, a junior chemist who had been among those watching in the bathroom, approached hesitantly. Madeline, he started, clearly uncomfortable. About yesterday, I should have said something. I studied him for a moment. Yes, you should have. He flinched but nodded. I know. We all should have. Why didn't you? I asked, genuinely curious. Vince made it clear what happens to people who challenge him, after what he did to Tanya. What exactly did he do to Tanya? I pressed. Mason glanced around nervously. She found inconsistencies in the quarterly safety report. When she brought it up, Vince started assigning her to night shifts, excluding her from meetings. Then he put a written warning in her file, claiming she was negligent with equipment calibration, which was completely false. She quit the next day. I'd suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed made my blood boil. Things will be different now, I promised, but I need everyone's help to make that happen, starting with honesty. The following days were a blur of activity. The reformulation proceeded smoothly, now that the technical concerns were being addressed openly. The team, liberated from Vince's oppressive management, worked with renewed energy and creativity. I made a point of recognizing contributions publicly and creating space for questions and concerns. But paradise it was not. Vince's allies in management began a quiet campaign of resistance. Requests from my division were mysteriously delayed. Resources I needed became suddenly unavailable. Emails went unanswered. Then the whispers started. I was emotional, difficult to work with. I had orchestrated Vince's downfall out of jealousy. I was sleeping with Leonard to advance my career. Each day brought new challenges. A key supplier suddenly canceled our order, citing restructuring. The quarterly budget review meeting was rescheduled 3 times, always to times I couldn't attend. Access to certain research databases was inexplicably revoked for my team. After 2 weeks of this, I received an unexpected visit from Pavel, a veteran engineer who had largely kept to himself during Vince's reign. They're setting you up to fail, he said without preamble, closing my office door behind him. Who is? Vince's friends on the executive committee. They've convinced themselves that if you fall flat, Vince can return as the savior. I leaned back in my chair, processing this. How do you know this? Pavel hesitated. My brother-in-law plays golf with Drew Lansing. Drew's been bragging about how they're going to make sure you crash and burn before the quarterly report. Drew Lansing, VP of Operations, and Vince's most vocal supporter. If he was actively working against me, that explained a lot. What exactly are they planning? I asked. They're going to claim the XL5 reformulation was unnecessary, a costly delay caused by your excessive caution. They've commissioned an outside lab to run tests, designed to show the original. A formula was stable enough for market. My mind raced. But that's easily disproven. We have all the original test data. Pavel's expression turned grim. Data can be reinterpreted. Numbers can be massaged. You know that as well as I do. He was right. With enough selective presentation, even solid science could be questioned. And with board members who lacked technical background, perception could override reality. Why are you telling me this? I asked. You've never gotten involved in politics before. Pavel's weathered face showed a flash of emotion. My daughter works in a facility that would use XL5 if that unstable formula had gone to market. He shook his head. Some things matter more than keeping your head down. After Pavel left, I sat motionless, staring at the wall. The temporary victory of Vince's suspension now seemed hollow. The real power players were moving against me, and they had resources and connections I couldn't match. I thought about resigning, finding another position somewhere without this toxic baggage. It would be easier, cleaner, but then I thought about the bathroom floor, about the yellow gloves and the mop, about colleagues watching in silence, about Tanya and Raj and all the others who had been pushed out for doing the right thing. No, running wasn't an option. That evening, I stayed late, alone in my office, formulating a plan. If Drew and his allies wanted a war, I would give them one, but on my terms, using weapons they wouldn't expect. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Leonard Graves, requesting an emergency meeting of the full executive committee for the following Monday. The second was to someone outside the company altogether, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered, professional but guarded. "Tanya, it's Madeline Reeves." There was a long pause. "Madeline, I heard you're running the division now." "Temporarily," I said, "and I need your help." Another pause, longer this time. "Why would I help the company that pushed me out?" "Not for the company," I said. "For everyone still trapped in the culture that Vince built. For the next person who might end up scrubbing toilets for telling the truth." The silence stretched between us. I could almost hear her weighing the past against the future. "What exactly are you planning?" she finally asked. I looked down at the notes I'd been making all night, a strategy that would either save the division or end my career permanently. "Something nobody will see coming," I replied. "Something that will change everything." As I explained my idea, Tanya's initial reluctance gave way to cautious interest, then to active engagement. By the end of the call, we had the beginnings of a plan that would either dismantle the entire power structure or bury us both professionally. The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation. By Monday morning, I was exhausted, but ready. As I drove to work, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered. Everything in place. Good luck." The executive committee meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. I had exactly 5 hours to set the final pieces in motion before walking into a room full of people who wanted to see me fail. What they didn't know was that I had stopped playing their game. I was playing an entirely different one now, one where their usual rules wouldn't apply and their usual weapons would be useless. By noon, rumors were flying throughout the building. Something big was happening. Nobody knew exactly what, but the tension was palpable. I received dozens of curious glances as I walked purposefully through the hallways, gathering what I needed. At 1:55 p.m., I stood outside the executive conference room, a slim folder in my hand containing just 3 documents. My heart pounded, but my resolve was absolute. "Ready?" Leonard appeared beside me, his expression unreadable. I nodded. "Once we go through that door, there's no turning back." "I know." He held my gaze for a moment. "Let's change this company." Together, we walked into the lion's den. The executive conference room fell silent as I entered. 12 people seated around an oval table, their expressions ranging from neutral to openly hostile. Drew Lansing sat at the far end, directly opposite Leonard's empty chair at the head. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Madeline," he said, voice dripping with artificial warmth, "we're so pleased you could join us for this discussion." I took the empty seat halfway down the table, placing my slim folder before me. "Thank you for accommodating the meeting request." Leonard settled at the head of the table. "I've called this emergency session to address concerns regarding the XL5 project and, more broadly, our safety reporting protocols." Drew leaned forward. "Yes, about that. I've received troubling information suggesting the production delay may have been unnecessary." He slid glossy reports toward each committee member. "Our independent analysis indicates the original formula showed acceptable stability within industry standards." Several heads nodded. I recognized the strategy immediately. Overwhelm with data, create doubt, shift the narrative. I didn't touch the report. "Before we discuss XL5 specifically," I said, "I'd like to address a more fundamental issue." Drew's eyebrow arched slightly. "We have a full agenda, Madeline. Perhaps we should stick to the matter at hand." "This is the matter at hand," I replied evenly. "For the past 2 years, our division has operated under a culture of intimidation that has compromised our scientific integrity and potentially endangered customers." An uncomfortable silence descended. Several committee members shifted in their seats. "That's a serious allegation," said Helena from marketing, her voice carefully neutral. "It is," I agreed, "and I have evidence." I opened my folder and removed the first document. This is a compilation of incidents where safety concerns were suppressed or altered before reaching executive level. 15 separate instances over 24 months. I passed copies to Leonard, who distributed them around the table. Drew received his with barely concealed contempt. Anecdotal complaints from disgruntled employees. He dismissed without reading it. Hardly evidence. Perhaps, I conceded, which is why I also have this. I removed the second document. A comparative analysis of original safety reports versus the versions that reached this committee. Specific alterations highlighted in red. As those pages circulated, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. The technical members of the committee were examining the documents with growing concern. Even if these discrepancies exist, Drew countered, recovering quickly, they may simply represent different interpretations of ambiguous data. That's why we have management layers, to filter information appropriately. Filter, I repeated, an interesting choice of word. I stood up, moving to the large screen at the front of the room. With the chair's permission, I'd like to present a brief demonstration. Leonard nodded. I connected my tablet to the display. What you're seeing is the accelerated stability test for XL5. 2 identical samples, the original formula and my modification. This test compresses 30 days of chemical degradation into 2 hours. The video played silently. Everyone watched as the original formula gradually discolored, the container visibly distorting from internal pressure. This isn't about interpretation, I said. This is physics and chemistry. When opened after 30 days, the original formula would release volatile compounds. In enclosed spaces like workshops or factories, this creates a serious health risk. Drew wasn't ready to concede. One test doesn't. We ran it 17 times, I interrupted. Same results every time. The independent lab, Drew began, didn't test for the specific degradation pathway I identified. I completed his sentence. Their protocol examined different parameters entirely. It was designed to miss the problem. Drew's face hardened. You're implying something inappropriate. I won't sit here and... I'm not implying anything, I said calmly. I'm stating directly that you commissioned a deliberately inadequate test to undermine my findings and protect Vince. Murmurs rippled around the table. Drew's allies looked increasingly uncomfortable. This is absurd, Drew snapped. Leonard, are we going to allow these unfounded accusations? Leonard remained impassive. I believe Madeline has more to present. I nodded, reaching for the third document, my final move. What concerns me most isn't just the XL5 issue. It's the pattern of behavior that created an environment where raising legitimate safety concerns resulted in punishment rather than investigation. I passed the final pages to Leonard. As they circulated, I continued. 7 employees have left the division in the past year, after raising technical objections to projects. 3 more were demoted or reassigned. And yesterday, I received some interesting information about why that happened. The conference room door opened. Tanya walked in, professional and composed in a tailored navy suit. Behind her came Raj, then 3 other former employees I recognized from personnel files. Drew half rose from his chair. This is highly irregular. Who authorized? I did, Leonard said quietly. Please continue, Madeline. These former employees have provided sworn statements describing systematic retaliation for raising safety concerns, I explained. But more importantly, they've revealed a financial incentive structure tied to pushing products through, regardless of risk factors. Drew's face drained of color. The third document in your hands, I continued, details how certain executives received substantial bonuses for each product launched. Bonuses that weren't contingent on product safety or performance, only on launch dates being met. All eyes turned to Drew, whose usual composure was crumbling visibly. This creates an inherent conflict of interest, I said, when the same people who benefit financially from rapid launches also have the power to silence safety concerns. We've created a system designed to fail. The room had gone deadly silent. Even Drew's strongest allies were now examining the documents with disturbed expressions. What exactly are you proposing? Helena finally asked. A complete restructuring of our safety protocols, I replied. Independent review panels, protection for employees who raise concerns, and most importantly, a severing of the connection between launch bonuses and those responsible for safety oversight. I turned to face Drew directly. It's not just about Vince. It's about the system that rewarded his methods. Drew rallied for one final counterattack. This is nothing but an ambitious power play. Madeline orchestrated Vince's downfall to position herself for promotion. These so-called witnesses are her friends, helping her agenda. Tanya stepped forward. Actually, I hadn't spoken to Madeline in over a year before she called me this weekend. I came forward because she was the first person with enough courage to challenge the culture you created. And this isn't about ambition, I added. It's about preventing disasters before they happen. It's about making sure no one else gets punished for doing their job correctly. Leonard rose, commanding the room's attention. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, as well as additional information gathered during our internal investigation. The facts are unambiguous. He looked directly at Drew. This company will not prioritize speed over safety. Not now, not ever. The meeting continued for another hour, but the outcome was essentially decided. By the time we adjourned, a 3-person committee had been formed to implement a new safety oversight system. Drew had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, and I had been confirmed as the permanent director of the chemical division. As people filed out, Leonard held me back. You took an enormous risk, he said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. The board might have sided with Drew. They've known him for years. Data doesn't lie, I said, and neither do test results. That's why I've always trusted science over politics. Leonard studied me thoughtfully. What made you start collecting all this evidence? You couldn't have put this together just over the weekend. I smiled slightly. I've documented everything since the day Vince first dismissed my concerns about XL5. Not because I planned this moment, but because careful documentation is what good scientists do. The following week brought seismic changes. Drew resigned rather than face a formal investigation. Vince's termination was announced via company-wide email, citing violations of ethical standards and falsification of safety data. 3 of their closest allies requested transfers to other divisions. But the most satisfying moment came unexpectedly. 3 weeks after the executive meeting, I was working late when a maintenance worker knocked on my office door. "Excuse me, Director Reeves? We're reconfiguring some office spaces and need to verify which items belong to the company versus personal effects." "Which spaces?" I asked. "Mr. Harlow's former office and Mr. Lansing's suite." I accompanied him down the hallway to Vince's old office, the space I had deliberately chosen not to occupy when I became director. Inside, boxes were already half-packed. "What's happening to this space?" I asked. "Converting it to the new Safety Oversight Committee headquarters," the worker said, checking his clipboard. "And Mr. Lansing's corner office is becoming a shared workspace for the technical review team." I stood there a moment, looking at Vince's nameplate already removed from the door, at his motivational posters being taken down from the walls. Physical erasure following professional disgrace. In that moment, standing in the hollowed-out shell of Vince's domain, I finally felt the weight lift. Not just because he was gone, but because the system that had elevated and protected him was being dismantled. The bathroom humiliation had been his attempt to break me. Instead, it had become the catalyst for his downfall and for meaningful change. The yellow gloves, the mop, the watching crowd, all had backfired spectacularly. By trying to publicly demonstrate his power over me, he had revealed his true character to the one person who could end his career, Leonard Graves. My revenge wasn't in destroying Vince personally. It was in exposing the broken system and rebuilding it into something better, something where expertise outweighed hierarchy, where safety concerns were treated as valuable input rather than inconvenient obstacles. 6 months later, our division received company-wide recognition for the successful launch of XL5 with its improved stable formula. Customer feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and orders exceeded projections by 30%. At the celebration gathering, I made sure to acknowledge every person who had contributed, especially those who had initially watched my humiliation in silence, but had since found their voices in our reformed culture. Success isn't about individual triumph, I told the assembled team. It's about creating environments where everyone can contribute their expertise without fear, where doing the right thing is rewarded rather than punished. As people applauded, I caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the room. Tanya, now heading our newly formed independent review panel, gave me a subtle nod of recognition. From allies of necessity, we had become genuine collaborators in transforming the company. The most fitting epitaph for Vince's career came in the form of a new company policy, unanimously approved by the board, the Reeves Protocol for Safety Reporting, ensuring that technical concerns could never again be silenced by management pressure. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't personal destruction, but systemic change. The bathroom humiliation became the catalyst for a workplace transformation no one saw coming, especially the person who handed me that mop. If you enjoyed this story of workplace justice, hit that subscribe button for more tales of sweet, satisfying revenge against toxic bosses. Drop a comment sharing your own experience with workplace bullies. Did you ever get to see karma catch up with them? Remember to like this video if you believe that sometimes the most powerful response to humiliation isn't getting even, but getting better. Thanks for listening.